All right, I just want to remind everybody that we are recording this session so that others can listen later. So if you can please keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking, and we're hoping that we will have some conversation through our time together this afternoon. So maybe take a minute there on that on your bottom bar in the bottom left-hand corner. I think most of us are so familiar now with Zoom, but make sure you know where your mute button is, and also know how to stop and start your video as you would like to. We will be using the chat today for some of our discussion. So also making sure that you can find that on the bottom bar there to be able to jump in and chat with us. And we will put a link for the certificate at the end of the training in the chat so that you'll have that. Today, you're joining us for our Engage OK in the Cloud Family Engagement, Launching Your Journey. We're excited to have everybody here from, as I mentioned just a minute ago, it looks like about every corner of the state with us. So Shantae, if you can do the next slide for me. We just want to make sure that we're welcoming everyone. We know that you have a choice this summer about where you're spending your time and really your focus. And we just are so grateful that you've chosen to spend some time with us today on this topic around family and community engagement. And it's exciting to see so many of you from across the state prioritizing this work by sharing your time with us this afternoon. I'm Sonia Johnson. I'm the Executive Director for Family and Community Engagement and our Title IV Part B 21st Century Community Learning Center programs here at the State Department of Education. And with me today, I have Shantae Fenner. She'll be joining in to assist me with the slides and monitoring our chat. And so if you have any issues, please feel free you can chat with Shantae and she can help you with those also. So in my experience, I think most participants come to sessions that have family engagement or community engagement in the title because they're hoping that they're going to walk in and I'm going to have a magic wand. And there have been times where I've actually brought a magic wand to the training. And most participants in these conversations are really hoping that I'll have, one thing that if I tell you one magic thing that you do, how that will improve your efforts around family engagement. And what I want to tell you today is that there isn't a magic bullet for this, but there are really proven evidence, research-based practices and strategies to help all of us strengthen our work in this area. So we recognize that each community is unique, and our goal is really to share a frame to guide your work and to help you based on the unique needs of your community, your school, your classroom, and the relationships that you're building there. So we want to start out today with just what the key learning points are to make sure that it's aligned with what you're hoping to get today as we start to work through this discussion. So our goal today is to really focus on some reflection with all of you. In order to be able to build the work, we have to understand where we are in the work, where we're beginning, both as individuals, where we're coming from, but also looking at where the work is in our community, in our schools, and then where we want it to be. What is our vision for this work also? We're also going to explore the new Oklahoma Family Engagement Framework. We only have 90 minutes, so we're going to introduce it, show you where to find it, give you some resources around that, really leave you with some tools and strategies for you to take back to your work. But we're really hoping that this is just the beginning of a conversation with all of you, and that you'll be looking to us and contacting us for more information as you move forward and grow in your work. So if you can go to the next slide, Shantae. We want to start out, most oftentimes we find that we reflect at the end of a training or at the end of a class or at the end of a lesson. And we really want to encourage you today to start this work in that reflective mindset, really thinking about how throughout the work you take time to reflect on where you are. And so we want to do that and model that as we go through our time together today. So what we'd like to ask you to do is to really, we've got people in the waiting room, Shantae, there we go. All right. So what we want to do today is to ask you to start out by thinking about this question. And we hope that you'll use the chat. We've got about 100 people on, but if somebody wants to unmute and talk just a little bit, you're free to do that. Also, just making sure that you go back on mute at the end would be helpful for us. But if you could use the chat and just tell us, do you believe that every family in your classroom, in your school, on your team is engaged with their child's learning? Give everybody a minute to kind of put in where they're feeling. Where are you feeling like you're starting? You think they want to, but maybe they don't have the tools. Some are more engaged than others, so there might be kind of this level of engagement that you're seeing there. Most part, we're online, and so how do we engage when we're online with students doing that virtual setting? It's a great piece of something for us to be thinking about in the work also. Don't believe every family's engaged. Some people are saying yes, I think to the extent that they're able to. Most of them aren't involved, so there's kind of that discussion between involvement and engagement. So when we think of family engagement, what we really think of is it's a very people-focused work. And so when we start to focus on these personal relationships, it becomes really easy for us to start to talk about where people aren't or where they're failing, maybe where they're not being as engaged or being as good of partners, joining hands, thinking about how we change systems. So today what we're really wanting to do is to encourage you to look beyond the program, the activity, the event, beyond that individual parent or that individual teacher, and instead think about this as this interdependent partnership in the work. The work of family engagement is really, as I said, ongoing, it's dynamic, it's inclusive. So we want to start thinking about how engagement, instead of thinking of it as this individual person, how we can think about it as this system and how this system might actually lighten our load rather than creating extra work for all of us. And also how it's not only dependent on the people, but it's also dependent on the policies and the systems and the things that we put in place, not just one individual. So as an example of this, I really appreciated that comment about the online, nature of what we're doing right now. If we think back over the last year and how we needed these systems in place to support the learning during the pandemic, during the height of the pandemic, and how we now have had this window into where our families are and how our families are able to engage and our community partners, how they're able to engage in the learning. And they've had this opportunity to look at learning and education overall, and how we had to quickly develop systems and put things in place. It's time for us to be thinking about how we can't go back at this point, that it's time for us to move forward with that work and really learn from our experiences over this past year. So I think that everybody can kind of see that, our first reflection is that we're feeling as a group, for the most part, that no, we're not seeing everyone engaged. Okay. So as we think about that, Shantae, if you can go to the next slide. Throughout this session, what we want to be able to do is bring you and encourage you to use data and evidence. So although we're reflecting, we're thinking about where we are, it's also important for us to check ourselves and to ask what data or what evidence do we have behind what we're reflecting or what we're feeling in this work. And so we want you to use your data. And we also want you to use other trusted resources to help you plan and to make decisions and think about your next steps. And so as we think about that, one of the trusted resources that we've used over the course of the past couple of years has been Learning Heroes. Learning Heroes is a national nonprofit whose mission is to inform and equip parents to best support their child's educational and developmental success. And so this is one, as you're thinking about, where do I start with the work? What do I need to be thinking about to inform myself about the work? We'd encourage you to look at Learning Heroes, but also to share Learning Heroes with your families. So if you go to the next slide and we think about our reflection a little bit, what we actually know from research conducted by Learning Heroes is that when asked, parents say they are deeply engaged in their children's learning and development. And if we ask them whose responsibility it is, they actually place responsibility for their child's development primarily back on themselves and family. And so you see that we know what you've said here is truly how you feel, where you are at this point in the work as educators across our state. So you see that we have this disconnect occurring. And you'll see, maybe you can't see me on screen as much. I might need to sit up, but I walk around a lot like this, talking about this disconnect in our work. And we see today this in many of our own reflections as we're moving forward. But yet there's research, there's data. We've talked to parents and we know that they're feeling engaged, that they take engagement as their responsibility. So if we go to the next slide, what we know is that it's a real catch-22 for all of us. And maybe instead of it looking at it that someone's feelings or beliefs maybe are not correct, maybe what we need to do, and this is what Learning Heroes did, is dig a little bit deeper and ask ourselves, how do we define engagement? And maybe the disconnect is more in how we're defining it, the words that we're using, and how we're doing the work than it is actually in the actions that we're seeing. So you see here that when asked on the left side there, teachers report that the most important way for parents to know how their child is doing is to be in real communication, regular communication with them. When we ask parents, how do you know? How do you know how your child is doing? If you look at what parents are thinking, the most important way for them to know is through report cards with regular communication. Look at that, falling fifth on this list. And parent-teacher conferences don't even come in the top 5 for parents as a way for them to know how their child is doing. Instead, parents are putting in things and answering with things like how their child feels about school, their mood, their body language, do they want to go? So as we began this work around family engagement and the framework that I'm going to share with you, we really recognized as an organization, one of the first things we have to do is better align our thinking and our definitions of what actually engagement even really means at this point in time. I'm just checking the comments too. Shantae, if there's anything in there that you want to jump in as I'm talking, please feel free to interrupt me as we go here. So our next reflection is this question about, why do you think there are families who are not engaged? So let's reflect again. Thinking back on that first one, if your answer was no, which overwhelmingly the majority of folks that answered, it was no, why do you think they're not engaged? And then also, what kind of evidence do you have that might support your assumptions there? Yep, job times don't align. Really good point there, Mila. Overwhelmed by their circumstances. That's really good, Adrian, too. Yeah. Accessibility. When we talk about all of this work, we're talking about equity. Do they have the resources that they need to be able to communicate and to be able to participate with the work? Language barriers. Again, that's an accessibility issue for us. Maybe they don't know how. Great point, Mariah. They've never experienced it. These are all, yes, all wonderful reflections for all of you to be thinking about. So if we can go to the next slide, Shantae. What Learning Heroes also found as they talked with families was that it may not be attributed to them not caring, which I have to tell you that I'm so heartened by your responses, because it wasn't that they didn't care. You weren't here saying that they didn't care. You were saying maybe there are barriers there that we need to all work on together. And that's really what Learning Heroes, talked about, that really when they looked at this work, they found that parents often, it's not that because they're not physically present they're not engaged. Instead, what they found was that there was often this false sense of security in what was happening. So families were placing a lot of trust actually in the education system. They had this perception that their students were doing well, probably because they go back to report cards as one of their primary ways of understanding where their children are performing. But if we look at that, so if 90% of the families that were a part of this study, really thought that their children are doing well, the reality of a recent study, 2019, if we look at the NAEP data, only 35% of our students were nationally performing, at or above grade level work. So again, it really is showing us from these two very quick data points from one, trusted resource, that we really have this disconnect again, mostly in our common language and our understanding of the work. And so how do we address that?
Sonia, before you move forward, Adrian made a really good point, and she mentioned that it was really that she thought this year that she really saw that when students were not in school, most of the responses to parents were that they thought that their child was virtual. So it's pretty obvious that they didn't understand the process that was going on in either the program or the classroom.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think that those are all, those are all the pieces that we're seeing about the importance of communication and how we communicate and making sure that we're on the same page with our communication. And so that's a great point again, Adrian, it really illustrates our work and how we feel, just like today, I'm going to feel like I've given you a message. But really, I have to do this check of have you heard the same message that I've been giving? Are we both understanding where we stand? And so as we look at this, and if you'll go to the next slide, Shantae, the exciting part about this is that there's resources out there to help us do this. And there's a lot of research and evidence to back us up in the decisions that we're making. So the National Association for School, Family, and Community Engagement, NAFSCE, with a group called the Frameworks Institute, examined how the public thinks and talks about family engagement. For over 3 years, they studied with more than 6,000 participants this idea around family and community engagement. And they really identified what's important to emphasize, how to explain the importance of family engagement, and things that should be left unsaid, how we're sometimes giving so much information that we're confusing people instead of keeping it simple for them. So you'll see in a lot of the work coming out from our office in the Oklahoma State Department of Education, this idea of a space launch. This is because the research by NAFSCE, first of all, it's cute. Let's just all say we know that rocket is cute and we love the colors. Everything is great with it, but there is a research base behind those pieces too. So what you're going to see is the research found that this metaphor for effective family, school, and community engagement is actually a space launch. So when we talk about this work with families, as we talk about it with you, as you talk about it with families and with communities, we want you to think about sharing this message of a space launch. Family engagement works like mission control, launching the child's learning. In more detail, as we think about it, just like many engineers, scientists, and mathematicians must work together to launch the rocket into space, Families, schools, and communities need to work together to launch the child's learning. Like a team at Mission Control, families, schools, and communities together need to engage each other to plan, implement, and complete their shared mission of the child's successful learning. So, to be able to do that, we have to have regular, reliable communication and engagement by everyone involved. And in order to get the learning to take off, in order to help the child reach the goals. So, our goal with what I'm going to share with you today is really, with this family engagement framework, is really to fuel your work. Our role at the Department of Education is to give you the resources you need and the supports, and to remove barriers that you might be having in being able to complete this mission around engaging families and communities. Our goal is to help you build this really common language across our state with shared beliefs that will support opportunities for all of our students. We want this for all of our students in all of our communities. So as we look at this, go ahead, Shantae.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Don made a really great comment to that on your piece about reliable and regular communication around ensuring that communication is clear. She's noticed that parents don't know the lingo or understand what the teachers are trying to communicate during their conferences. And that could also be a part of that disconnect that we're seeing with families.
Dawn, if I could reach out and give you a virtual hug right now, that's what I would be doing. You are right on target with that. That is a big issue that we're facing. And so again, having those conversations, making sure that we have the shared language, because and we do it. You know, I sit here and I say things like OSDE, and I assume everyone knows that that stands for the Oklahoma State Department of Education. We need to make sure that we're always asking ourselves and reflecting on that. Great point. So on that next slide then, what we're really trying to do as we map this launch is think about the work of NAFSCE, and you can see their website on there, nafsce.org, very easy. And again, another trusted resource for you. We really want to think about how we're setting goals, how are we planning our launch, who will be a part of the work as we think about what engineers, mathematicians, who do we need at the table with us doing this work, where we will start the work, and how we'll know we're successful in the work. How will we set goals and know that we've reached those goals? How will we measure our success? So here you see how this idea of the space launch can help us easily see how intentional and effective family, school, and community engagement depends not just on you as the individual educator. So I think that sometimes we come to these trainings and these meetings, and I'm looking through who you were. You're a classroom teacher. And oftentimes that can be very overwhelming to be that one person and thinking that you have to take this all on yourself. What we're really trying to do with the framework in our state is encourage this shared responsibility with the work. So it not just depends on you as that individual educator, but we also need to step back and look at our policies and our practices that our schools have, and our district, and us at the state. What are we doing to support you in that work? So let's go on to the next slide, which is our next reflection. And what I'd really like to look at with this reflection is what would engaging every family actually look like to you? So if we want to work on closing this gap from perception to reality, what does that look like? How do we know where we want to be? So if you could take just a minute and share some things with us. We're going to take some time here and read your thoughts. Erica, we'll share the website with you just shortly in one of the next slides so that you'll know where the framework can be found. Yep, consistent communication, this is great. Conversations, and that they're ongoing. Parent and student. I like that piece around making sure that the students are engaged in this also. Safety, I like that, a safe place for parents to ask questions. And there are events, family nights, events that make those possible for families. That's great too, Bonnie. Two-way communication. Oftentimes it is a challenge to think about, how are we listening as much as we're speaking? Consistency. I like the variety. Yeah, that's a good one too, Sharon. The variety of communication tools. That just because one tool works for one family or one teacher or one community, we might need to vary that. Mm-hmm. And really, what we're thinking about too, as we're talking about that two-way communication, it's really helping parents build those leadership skills to be able to ask those questions, building their capacity to engage in the conversation. And really what I'm seeing that all of you are really, this is exciting for me, because as we're thinking about the framework, we're going to share with you some pathways and some ways that we see this work taking place in our state. And really what we're seeing is many of the things that you're talking about are what one of the first pathways really is around strengthening relationships and how we do that. Mm-hmm. So let's go on to the next slide, Shantae, because that's going to answer the first question that came in the chat. So asking, where do I find this framework? So you're starting to, to hear us talking about the Oklahoma Family Engagement Framework, and we're excited to introduce that. Some of you maybe have been on some calls with the Trauma Summit, or we've done this through some other group calls with our after school work to begin talking about this framework that's available for everyone. The framework is on the SDE website, and it's just at sde.ok.gov, and then that / family community engagement, FCE. And really what we want to start talking to you about today and introducing to you today is the idea of a framework. And a framework is really, as we think about framing a house, a framework is really that basic structure, that underlying system or concept that's going to support your work as you move forward in this engagement with communities and families. It's not a specific curriculum. You're not going to pick this up and have a 1, 2, 3. This is the event that you have. Or a specific strategy. It's really this frame for us to all begin to develop that common language that, as we started our conversation today, thinking about, that we've really missed out on. The framework, one of the things that I also want to share about the framework before we jump into it, is that we've talked to you so far about a couple of national resources, NAFSCI and Learning Heroes, and there will be others as we go through, and there are others contained within the Family Engagement Framework. But the framework was also developed on some local data. There was information and a study by the RAND Corporation that pulled out information specifically from Oklahoma education leaders, building principals, and instructional coaches, those folks that are in leadership within your districts. And it also talked to, the survey also included staff, frontline teachers, and there was this dialogue around family engagement and what it looks like. So I hope as you dig into the family engagement framework, you'll see that the research is very Oklahoma specific. That's why we wanted to have an Oklahoma framework that you could rely on. So on that next slide, Shantae, I want to make sure that we share with everyone what a framework is. So as I said, a framework is not a curriculum. It's not a specific strategy, but what the framework is really a call to action. It's a vision for our family engagement work here in our state. And it's also a collection of research and evidence-based strategies that support family engagement. The framework was written for schools, for all of you as educators, but also as you look at it, we had to check ourselves also when we were talking about the lingo. I appreciated that comment earlier. We really tried to keep the framework accessible so that if a family or a community member picked it up, we weren't using jargon. We were really just establishing this base level of information that we could all use. And the goal with that is to make possible effective partnerships that support student learning and school improvement. And so as we think about the framework, this was developed in collaboration with technical assistance from the Council of Chief State School Officers, NAFSCE, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, a policy equity group looking at equitable access for our students. We were one of 16 states selected to begin this work on a framework for our state. And that's where this work came from. And so a group of Oklahoma educators and leaders came together to begin to look at several components that will be contained within the framework. So what I want to do first, and before we jump into the specific document itself, is I want to share this next slide. And thanks, Amanda, for putting that link in the chat. I appreciate your help with that. So this is a slide that's often shared in an activity with Dr. Steve Constantino. He's the author of Engage Every Family. Again, another trusted national resource for us. So I want you guys to take just a minute, and as we reflect on this one and in the chat, I would really like us, and please feel free to unmute, I'd like us to take just a little bit of time with this picture. What do you see going on in this picture? Life. That's great, Kim. Yes.
Oh, no.
Good try, Ruth. I appreciate that. Anybody else? Barriers to engagement, overwhelm, disarray, disorganization, distraction, checked out, disconnect, single parent question, feeling helpless. We have 5 kids, chaos, a mom who's given up, unsafe environment. Maybe this is normal, unsafe. So I want you to take and think, Calgon, take me away. Yes, Ruth, I get it. I agree. Looks like real life is going on. Yeah. So as we think about that a little bit, I want us to think about our natural inclination and where we are and how we come to the work, as we've talked about kind of our beliefs there. And it's not easy to talk about beliefs with 150 people on a 90-minute Zoom. But what I want you to think about with this a little bit is, did you notice that there wasn't like everything that came in the chat was a disconnected, disengaged. Let's take a minute and let's think about, is there anything positive that we see in this picture? Can anybody share anything positive? Something that's asset-based. There are toys for the kids. Love it. Maria, there's food and utilities. That TV is on, isn't it? They have a home. Mom is in the room. All the kids, yep, they have clothes. There's food. Yes, there's a pizza there. This is great. She's there. She's sitting with the kids. Yeah, there's some kind of a hero TV show. You're right. Yeah, that's great. Some needs are being met. Yes. And so I want us just to all think, yeah, the curlers possibly getting ready. Absolutely. Maybe there's, yeah, some type of self-care there. Thinking about maybe getting ready to go somewhere, doing the best she can with what she has? Hmm? And so I think it's really easy for us, and I know it's very easy for me. And so I hope that you all know that when I talk about these pieces, I bring them to you because they've so resonated with me. And I want you to know that when I first looked at this picture, it is our human nature to immediately go to all of those things, that maybe they're struggling with, instead of starting with, what do we have? What is going on well here? What is the asset? How is this mother? And how do we even know, first of all, that it is the mother? We've made an assumption again, is caring for these children. And so, again, as we think about beliefs, that's really, as we worked with Dr. Constantino in some of this work, he was very good about helping us to always be checking our beliefs. So, Shantae, if you'll go to that next slide. The first part of the work in anything that we do, and as we develop the framework, was really to check our own beliefs, in this work and what we wanted to put into the framework. What are the beliefs of our organization? And what is an organization? It's this group of people. So, what are our individual beliefs also as we're coming to the work? So, our framework starts out on the first pages talking about what our beliefs are. So, we put that our beliefs are that Oklahomans are known for their innovative can do spirit. That resolve is reflected in how Oklahoma schools, how your schools, how our schools rise to the occasion to support students and families. And I don't think that there's been any better time for me to illustrate this than after the last year that we've had and how you have all risen to this occasion. While there's no one size fits all approach, for educating a child, there is one essential piece, and that's this engagement with families. So, at the heart of family engagement is this focus on the inclusion of all families as equal partners in their child's learning. So, when you think about this framework, we want you to know that it was developed, with these beliefs. We believe that family engagement should be designed to remove barriers and to improve access and opportunities and to improve knowledge and skills so that all families, I want to bold and underline, all families can be partners in the education of their children. We believe that all families have hopes and dreams for their children, and they really do want what is best for them. We believe that all students can grow and that all schools can improve in this work. And so we really want you to know, as we think about this, that this is the frame for the information that we'll be presenting in the framework. So Shantae, on to that next slide. So I'm a quote person. If you walk around my house, you see I have lots of quotes. My office, I can think of 2 or 3, on the wall right now. Shantae can attest to that. But this quote has always been something, we've had it on our website. It's always been something that's really resonated with me. This talks about partnerships are not hard work, but they're the heart of our work. They're not more work, but they are really the work we are trying to do in education. It's not harder work, but it's smarter work. And our goal is really to mobilize all the resources that are available that will contribute to our student success. So when we talk about the whole child, the whole community, that whole school approach to our work, this is really what we're talking about. And this quote is from Dr. Joyce Epstein. And Dr. Epstein is at Johns Hopkins University. She's with the Center on School, Family, and Community Partnerships, another trusted resource, in this work that you might want to consider reviewing. So Shantae, if you'll go on to that next slide. So as we saw from Learning Heroes, then much of our engagement work needs to start with our common language. If we examine our beliefs and we think about this language and our common understanding, one of the main goals of the framework is to begin to establish this for everyone. It's really our vision of the work. And so as an organization, what we did is we spent time with these national organizations with this technical assistance, and we reviewed many local, state, national definitions. And then we began to build consensus around this definition. Without a common definition, we really had to ask ourselves, how will we know if we've achieved what it is we're trying to do with family engagement? So, our definition that's contained within the framework is a starting point for all of you. It might be the first step that you have within your organization is examining beliefs and talking about definitions. So, if we think about family and community engagement is a shared responsibility among families, schools, and communities to build relationships that support a child's learning and growth from birth through college and career. Our goal with this, as we started to think about our definition, was again to keep it simple. We really want this to be this shared responsibility, keywords, it's relational. And our goal is to support learning. We're the Department of Education, you're educators. We want to look at how our students are growing and learning. So the next step that we had to do was really say, what is a family as we look at our definition? So we define family as a group of persons dedicated to the well-being of children. And that may include parents, it may include grandparents, extended family members, caregivers, or any responsible individual. So as we sit here and talk with you today around family engagement and talk about community engagement, it's really important for you to understand who it is that we're talking about in the work. When we talk about schools, so as we're talking about, it's the shared responsibilities among families and schools, we look at schools as a group of persons inclusive of all the staff within the school and the district. So when we use through this document schools, we're not just saying that it's a classroom teacher's responsibility. We're not just saying that it's a building principal's responsibility. We're looking that it's everyone that's a part of that organization. And when we think about community and start to talk about community, we think of that as a group of people who share common attitudes, interests, goals, or a geographic area. So we know oftentimes in Oklahoma, we're talking about very rural areas. And so you really might have to look at what your community looks like. That might be a county, it might be a region, it might be a faith-based group that you're a part of. Your community can be very, many different groups there. And then as we looked at our definition, we wanted to make sure that we were all very clear on what we meant by relationships, and that we really think that relationships are meaningful, equitable, and culturally responsive interactions among the families, educators, and community partners that provide opportunities to listen to, work with, and learn from each other as full and equal partners. So I remember, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name, where you talked about that two-way communication. That's critical. Again, are we listening and building those relationships together? So my question back to you would be, has your school or your community defined community engagement and what it is that you would like to see in this work? And if not, possibly this definition in the framework would be a place for you all to start, to ask yourselves, is this the definition we want, or do we need to tweak and have our own definition in our community? So Shantae, if you can go to that next slide. What we're looking at here then are, as the framework started to be outlined and we talked about our beliefs, we talked about what our definition was, and we looked at everything from, we have federal definitions in special education or in our title programs. We have definitions for family engagement that come out of, a student support area. We have definitions that are coming from our PTAs, from other Department of, Human Services, Health. So we looked at a variety of areas of this work with our technical assistance group and what was happening across Oklahoma. And there was actually an environmental scan, and that is also a part of the framework that would be very interesting for you to consider, that really took a look at what was happening across Oklahoma and what opportunities there were for this work. So as we developed that, what we knew we needed to do was to begin to organize the work. and sort of map out this guide for all of us to begin walking through and to begin digging a little bit deeper. So what we did was we looked at 4 key pathways. So we took the research and looked at many states have standards, many organizations have family engagement standards. We have research from, you may be familiar with Karen Mapp and the Harvard Family Research Project. There are many different groups that have these standards out there for family engagement. And so what we looked at was that as we looked at each of these, we looked at commonalities. And we developed for Oklahoma 4 key pathways for us to be thinking about to begin our work together. And as we think about these pathways, we really want to start everyone thinking through each one, but knowing that everybody may come into this work accessing a different pathway. So as we think about these 4 pathways for our work, what we looked at was strengthening relationships. What we wanted to do was establish more effective, personalized, two-way communication between our schools and families, designed to build mutual trust and respect, to reflect families' preferences, and to provide families an authentic sense of engagement in their child's learning. So I'm going back and I'm thinking about how you defined engagement. And I think that a lot of your definitions really connected to this strengthening relationships. And that may be an area where many of you want to start with the work. We also know that the research shows us that it's important for us to be building leadership. And when we talk about building leadership, that's really about expanding the awareness, the skills, and the abilities, along with the confidence of our families, our schools, and our communities to effectively support learning at school and at home and in the community. And if we think about this last year, we were working on this framework before COVID. And so as we're thinking about this, think about how important this last year has been about our families having that ability to support learning at home and how many community members came in to support learning in the community during the pandemic. So as we talk about leadership, it's not only building your ability as educators, but also building the skills of our families and our communities to support learning, which takes us to focus on learning. And as we think about this as a pathway, our goal is really to connect to all families, their interests, their identities, and their home lives to provide really, it's that about that relevance that we all talk about, providing meaningful experiences that support student learning and our student outcomes. And then the last pathway that we would talk about that the research shares with us is really about the connection to communities that our schools, and I think that many of you were feeling, this way over this last year, that our schools cannot do this alone, that it's really about creating strong connections among families, schools, our tribal nations, and the greater community that are compassionate, culturally sensitive, and designed to meet the needs of the whole child in support of lifelong learning. So as we think about these pathways and where you would start based on your own discovery in the first stage of what we talk about as a continuous quality improvement plan. So I want to stop here. I see a question coming in. Our building staff members were given engage. Yep, 5 simple principles. And we checked out homework was to read at least 1 chapter for when we return. I think that's wonderful, Deanna. That's so exciting for us because really, one of the things that I'm going to share at the end here is a way that you'll be able to interact with Dr. Constantino directly some more here over the course of the next year. So I'm excited to hear that some schools are picking that up. Do you all have a survey or measurement scale of finding out how parents feel about their relationship with the school? Yes, there are some tools out there, Tracy, and I'm at the end, you're going to have my email address. And I'm not sure if those tools, if we've actually placed those on the website. I'll need to make sure I get you the link to some of those trusted tools, but there are several out there that are available for us. And Dr. Constantino, he does share some too in his book as we look at that. So Shantae, will you make sure that we capture that note? I know there's a lot of things coming in the chat and I don't want to miss those. So as we begin the work, what we want you to think about is continuous improvement on the next slide, Shantae, as a journey. And so when we think about family engagement, what we want you to begin to think about is, where do we begin? We begin by recognizing and reflecting on where we are, like we've been doing today. And that we really know, and again, this is, a piece that we hear often, family engagement, it's not complicated, it's simple, but it's not always easy. And so, as we encourage you to think about this journey, we want you to think about it not as a destination, but it's something that we're continually checking ourselves on and thinking through. So, as we frame it as a continuous journey, we think about this plan, do, and review model. You may use this model in a lot of different areas within your organization. It might be called assess, plan, improve, plan, do, check, act. It's really this opportunity of taking your first step being to plan, to discover, to collect all the information you have. So Tracy, that's why I just wanted to stop right there and say, you're asking, do I have the information I need? What a great question. How do I find a survey? Because I maybe need to ask some questions here along the way so that I'm listening as much as I'm sharing information. So again, that question just made my heart explode as we're having this conversation. The next thing you would do in this journey is really to create a plan based on where you are, based on the data you have, both nationally, what we've provided you as a state, data you might have in your local organization. How would you begin to create a plan? We've established the 4 essential pathways to guide, and we provided guiding questions to guide your effort and to help keep you on track. Finally, then what you would look at doing is this review idea. So what happened when you implemented your plan? As you started to look at, some of these questions, where your data is, what worked well, what would you change, and how would you move forward with it? So today, all we're going to do on the next slide in our short time together, Shantae, there we go. We're going to talk about this idea of plan. So this is really, as we think about plan, is where you collect all of the information you have around family engagement and you begin to identify the gaps. And so as we were talking about this, what we would want to ask you to do is to first, so Shantae, if you can go to the next slide for me. First thing you might want to do is visit sde.ok.gov, the Family and Community Engagement page. And on that page, you're going to see the framework. And on each page of the framework, we'll be building out tools and resources for you. So we have the framework done. Tracy will have a section that will have some surveys on there. Where do you begin? Where can you find some of that information? So this would be a spot that we'd ask you to keep checking back as we're building this. And the other piece is that we're going to ask you to help us build it. We can't build it alone. And so Shantae, if you'll go to the next slide for me, what you're going to see here on this page with the framework is that in each area of the framework, the 4 pathways, you'll see here that we've taken each pathway and broken it down into a section for you. And each pathway has its own spotlight section. On each pathway page, what we'll be doing is building out tools and resources to help you through the work. And so our goal here in this spotlight section was first just to get you a tool out there to begin looking at what each pathway means for you. So if you go to the next slide, what we've done on each pathway for you to begin the work is to ask you to look at these guides. And so each pathway, and all I'm going to show you today is the strengthen relationship, but there is a guide for build leadership, for focus on learning, and also for the connecting to community. And when you look at these, what you're going to see is that they're color-coded, because I'm a color-coded kind of a list, kind of a person for all of us, and everybody that you see that's working with me is smiling. And what we wanted to do is give you just a quick 1-page front and back that might start the conversation in your organization organization or in your building, or maybe just if you're a third grade teacher with your third grade team, where you're starting to look at this. And what we did was talked about plan. So we first started to break down that you want to gather all of the information that you have. And as you start to do that, what we've asked you to do is to look at this do piece of the work and start to ask yourself some questions. So maybe, I think the question about the location of surveys, it's, again, I keep going back to it, but a great question, because what you're doing is you're already in the middle of this session, 45 minutes in, you're already doing. And so as you're thinking about this as extra work, more work, I see all of you just all of a sudden, you're already doing it. It's just asking ourselves, are we doing it most effectively? Are we doing it well? What gaps do we have, and how can we fill in those gaps? So each of the path, go ahead, Shantae.
I'm so sorry.
No,
We
you're
just
good.
have a quick question about it. Will they receive a link for the slides today, because they want to make sure that they are able to access everything that you're saying?
Yes. So the slides and the recording will be on the Engage OK in the Cloud website for everybody. Everything will be there for you. And so as we think about these guides, what they're going to walk you through, each guide will walk you through this continuous improvement journey. It's going to provide you guiding questions. Again, not a book of questions. We've given you 6 to 8 questions to begin with. Let's keep this simple. We also provided you on the backside some facts. We've given you some data to help you start that conversation and that reflection. We also think it's really important for you to understand what the pathway might look like in action. So we've shared with you a national research piece or a book. It might be a promising practice, something that illustrates what strengthening a relationship looks like, what building leadership skills look like in that pathway in action. And then each guide has resources for you. And those resources are really what we're calling some of the trusted resources for you to begin this work. So if you haven't read Dr. Constantino's work, we're encouraging you to read that. We're talking to you about Beyond the Bell with Karen Mapp, that's done a lot of work around family engagement. We also talk about, powerful partnerships, Dr. Epstein's work at Johns Hopkins. So just so that you know, who are those trusted resources that I should start with? And then we're also giving you just this idea around what it looks like going forward. What would your next step be? So we encourage you, each of these guides is just, you can download it from our website. And Shantae, I know I didn't ask you to do this when we first talked, but could you go back a slide for me? So on this slide, you'll see on the front of each page, you'll see it says spotlights. Then you see it says pathway in action, and it has the guide and the link there for you. What we're also asking you to do, though, is down at the next step, it says share your family engagement story. And so what we really want to encourage you to do over the course of the next few months is also to tell us how that's going. What did strengthening a relationship look like in your community? Did you have success? Was there a struggle? How did you really look at those opportunities and those challenges and begin to as a group, not individually, really address those? So again, there's information there to ask you to share specific stories. So as you check back on the website, we'll be adding those stories and best practices that are Oklahoma centric for you, so that you can start to connect with others in the state that are doing the work. So Shantae, if you can go forward 2 slides now. Thank you. So as you base, as we start to think about this plan, and you base, on your plan, you're going to identify which pathway you want to start with. Each pathway has these guiding questions, and you can continue to visit the website. When you look at the overarching framework on pages 7 and 8, it's really going to help you decide which pathway to start with. So there's a series of questions there that are overarching that will start to lead you to, should I start with, the strengthening relationships? Should I start with building leadership? And so we want you to understand that there is in the full the full document support if you're not quite sure where you want to start with those pathways. So what I want to do next is on the next slide, I just want to share a couple of stories about some things that we're seeing that we don't have on the website yet for those spotlights around how we're seeing some of these, particularly that strengthening relationships piece, how we're seeing that take shape across our state. And so a couple of things that we're starting to see are more dedicated staff in our schools that are family engagement specific. So over the course of the last year, we've had a lot more contact with our districts that are looking at how we can put in place family engagement specialists that are really looking at this work, getting up day to day, thinking about it. And our schools are being very creative in how they're able to fund that. With ESSER funds, you're able to fund some of that work. Title I dollars allow you to fund that. Some are using general fund support to do that. We see a lot of our schools using the Title IV Part B, our 21st century funds, to have dedicated family engagement staff. So that is one thing that as we've started this conversation and folks have started to look at the work, they have identified that they need to make sure that they also have the time to do that work. Other stories that we want to be able to share with you over the course of the pandemic, we saw a lot of curbside connections taking place. So we saw many of our schools going out and it maybe wasn't an in-depth home visit, but as meals were being delivered to students' homes, as we were, doing check-in phone calls, thinking about that through the pandemic, we started to see many of our schools identifying how those home visits were really helping them develop relationships with families and communities throughout the work. So we're seeing a lot of that, and we'll have some more information on how we do that work well. We're also seeing that through the pandemic, we saw a lot of weekly check-ins and positive phone calls home. Instead of only making that call when there was an issue, it was, the pandemic necessitated us being able to really spend the time having those phone calls, thinking through with families what the next steps were, making sure that they understood how to log in and the supports that were needed. Another piece that we were seeing is that folks were starting to do what we're talking about as a family-friendly walkthrough. And that was as they were coming back to school, they were starting to think about what is the message that we're giving at school. And so there actually are national checklists out there that we'll share with you on our website also that start to talk about how do we evaluate what it looks like from a parent's perspective coming into our education system. And so we saw some of our school sites starting to do those as well. We did see more family engagement surveys, asking families their perceptions and making sure that we were aligned in the work. And then probably, one of the most heartfelt pieces that I saw also was as families came back and as students were coming back to school, we saw a lot of programs that were doing this hopes and dreams idea to better connect with families, where they were asking families as they came back, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? And really spending some time talking with families one-on-one. We actually had some programs that did family nights where they had families create posters to talk about these hopes and dreams so that we could better understand where families were and what they wanted and what their goals were moving forward. So these are the kinds of things that you'll start to see that we will be developing out. We had to get the framework out first. We had the guides that we were bringing out. And then our next step will be to share some of these stories and some of these resources so that as you go to that sde.ok.gov with the /FCE, you'll start to see that we'll be building out that website, but we need your help. We need you to tell us your stories to be able to continue to do that. So Shantae, if we can go to that next slide. So what we're really trying to do in this work, a couple of different things that I want to make sure that I'm sharing with you. The Flamboyant Foundation, another trusted resource for the work, it's located in Washington, D.C., And they conducted a meta-analysis linking family and community engagement to student learning. And this slide shows us which activities have a lower versus a higher impact on student achievement. So it's important for us to note in this slide, and what I really want you to make sure that you take away today is the word lower and higher. It's not that the low impact activities are bad activities, and it's not that anything that you're doing at this point is not good. It's taking the time with this framework to ask ourselves, is what we're doing having the highest impact that it can have? And if it's not, should we be letting go of some of those lower impact strategies to start to focus on things that we know might have a higher impact with our families? So these activities, the celebrations, the potlucks, the performances, they're all a really good first step to create that welcoming climate of partnership. However, as we look at this, we want to make sure that the framework and our discussions with all of you, are really focused on helping you work towards prioritizing and moving to what we know from the research are higher impact strategies in the work. And so I want to give you a minute just to look at some of these strategies and to think about which ones you're implementing now and which ones you might, be interested in implementing also. So as we think about this work, Shantae, if you can go 2 slides ahead. What we're really looking at is trying to move our state from this idea around family involvement to family engagement. And as we started our conversation today, really reflecting on our own beliefs and our own experiences, and we shared the framework and our vision, what we're really trying to do is move this vision to practice with the 4 pathways. So as you're thinking about those pathways, our goal is really to start moving from this being an individual responsibility into this shared responsibility in this partnership. And so I think of all of you as coming to this today. As you were sharing who you are and where you are, I felt like many of you were classroom teachers, and that can be really overwhelming to think that I am supposed to make this change all by myself in a system, in a school, whether it's even on just your small team. But what we're really doing is starting this conversation. And so our hope is that by starting this conversation and you starting this conversation, we'll start to see this movement into this shared responsibility and this partnership. We started out, as we think about involvement, we talked today a little bit about that deficit-based adversarial. When we looked at that picture, it was really easy for all of us to fall immediately, including myself, into this deficit-based model where we first, start thinking about, what's missing, what do we need to be adding? And instead, we really want to encourage people to be thinking about this strength-based and collaborative model. Where are we? What good things do we have going on? And how can we build on those great things? As we move from involvement to engagement, we hope that we'll start moving from these, what we call random acts of family engagement, into more systemic, more systems where we're thinking about how this work builds on what it is and aligns with what it is we're trying to accomplish with our students. When we think about it, we also want to move from this add-on, this one-time project that I'm going to go in and I'm going to do family engagement on one night because I have to have a family night with a very large group of families. And I'm never going to look at it again until next year when I have to do that. And so I think one of the main examples that I want to talk about with that one also is just an experience I had with a group of educators that I work with often. And we were in a room with about 100, it was probably about 150 people like this. And we were doing a large training, and everybody was at small groups of tables of 4. And when we would ask for reflection and conversation, when we would ask people to share with a group of 150, what they thought and where they were. And even today, as I offered to have, all of you unmute and start to share some beliefs and ideas, we don't, as people, tend to do that for the most part. And so instead, what we saw when I was working with this group was if we gave them the question to go back and have a discussion at their table, we couldn't get people to stop talking. Those tables of 4 or 6 or 8, it was very intentional and it was very deep conversation. And so I want us to really think about these add-on one-time projects. Also thinking about those one-time events. Maybe, our first step is something very small, that instead of having school-wide events, maybe you want to start thinking about a classroom event. Maybe you want to start thinking about a 3rd grade group event. How we start to get, because relationships are typically built in those smaller groups, that one-on-one conversation. And so providing those opportunities is really critical for all of our families. The last piece as we move from involvement to engagement is really what we want to start to think about is less about compliance. This is less about checking the box for that requirement, for that grant, for those funds, for what's happening in our school, and really sharing ownership and thinking about this continuous improvement process for you. So I'm, again, as I think about quotes, I think one of my favorites that I heard at a national conference at one point, and I won't be able to do it nearly as funny as the woman that did it, but she talked about the difference between involvement and engagement. And if you've ever been to a session with me, you've heard this, and this has new meaning for me as my son is now engaged. But she talked about, involvement. If your child comes home, daughter or son, and says, I'm involved with someone, I'm dating someone, that's great. We kind of have that conversation and move on. But when you think about engagement, when your child comes home and says, I'm engaged, that's a whole different level of commitment in the work, isn't it? And so I think language is very important. And what we're really trying to do is move from this idea in that dark blue column of involvement into something more of this commitment, into this engagement, this lighter blue column over here. So she had a really good one where she had put a ring on it and did a dance and everything. And I won't do that for all of you today, but I really do encourage you to be thinking about the difference between those words.
And Sonia, just speaking of the difference between involvement and engagement, I love that example that you give. The 2 slides back, some of the people were actually mentioning that it's very ironic that potlucks and back to school nights and those types of celebrations and performances are considered to be low. Whereas the other things are considered to be high. And I think it's exactly the reason that you said, because one is just parents showing up and another is a piece of them actually becoming engaged in the process.
Absolutely. Let's go back to that slide one more time, Shantae, because I do think that slide has just impacted my thoughts, in this arena of the work also. And I do think that, as we talk about that, there are many strategies, and that's what we're really going to be sharing with you on that website. Because today, again, I know we're presenting something at kind of this 30,000 foot level for you of how do we begin the work. But we thought that that's really important, because also we know that our families know when we're being genuine. And if we're not coming to our families with our genuine hearts, having checked in on our definitions and our beliefs, no matter what we say, no matter how many home visits or calls home we have, none of that is going to impact change. So you're right on target, Shantae, with thinking about those pieces. So again, I want us to spend some time on this and know that we'll be giving you more resources on these. And we want to be able to provide you more training on specific strategies. But if we don't first lay the groundwork, those strategies won't be successful. We won't know why we're doing them and what the research tells us and how to do them best. So let's go on to the next slide. So as we think about closing here, I want to allow time if there's questions and things we want to work on in the chat there. Yeah, Shantae, it's okay. Go to that next one first. And I can start with that one. So a couple of places for you to get information again. So we've shared our website. We've shared with you some of those national leaders. As you download the framework in there, there's research. There's a number of resources we continue to send you back to on the website. You're going to see those. But also we want to make sure that everybody is aware of our new Ready Together website also. And you can learn more about it there thank you, Shantae, put the link in the chat for you. This is really our action plan for supporting students through the pandemic and beyond. And so you can see here that this Ready Together website has different buckets or areas of focus that talk about student learning and success, prioritizing health and well-being, ensuring equity for all. And I think it's really important, and I'm really excited that one of these buckets is talking about engaging families and communities in this work. And then we also have a bucket that's looking at supporting teachers and leaders in the work. And so I would encourage you to visit this website often. This is where we'll roll out some of the statewide ESSER initiatives. So you may have been hearing about things like the Counselor Corps. You may have heard Superintendent yesterday talking about just some different initiatives that we'll be launching. This is where you'll find all of that information in a one-stop shop for you. There are also guidance documents on here. And a couple of the guidance documents that we've recently put together focus on schools and communities and how we can partner for summer learning. We have a document on here around developing partnerships with schools for our community members. And then we also will have a new document on here, which will be focusing on supporting learning at home. That, in addition to the family guides that are out there from our curriculum and instruction department, there will be several pieces that will be available so that you have one place that you can go. There will also be webinars, and we have done a couple of webinars on family engagement, on summer learning, on key topics that, as we're thinking about this time of recovery and accelerating learning, how we can all work together to make sure that we're getting our students on track and keeping them on track. So that is one place. And then Shantae, if you can go back that slide. ESSER or ESSA? Good question, Erica. Thank you. This is perfect. So ESSER is the Recovery Act, and ESSA is our title funding or our typical ongoing funding that we receive from the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And so what we're looking at here is ESSER, and that is really where we have those recovery funds to be looking at special projects and things that will accelerate the recovery following the pandemic. So what you're seeing here is just my contact information again, which Shantae has put in the chat for all of you. Also on this page, there is a link which Shantae will put in and Artie has put in the chat. She's always a step ahead of me for you to be able to get your certificate for today. And what we really want to encourage you to do as you think through this, and we'll leave the last 10 minutes here to stay on for questions, is this work is really, of course, there's decades of research, and you all have been doing something around family engagement. We know that, and you're all doing really amazing pieces of work around that. What we would ask you to do is to begin to share some of those stories, and that's what we see as our next step in the work. And so we hope that this will be a continued conversation. As I mentioned earlier, what you'll want to do is also watch that family engagement website, the FCE page. We will be hosting Dr. Constantino for a larger discussion around engaging every family as a keynote for all of you. And then we will also be having some classes and some courses with him that you would be able to access. So we'll be rolling out that initiative with all of you very soon so that you can continue to learn and dig deeper into that work. So we're excited about that opportunity. We're excited about the framework as a first step. And what we really need from you is we can't do this alone. We need to hear from you. That framework we really see as an iterative process. So if you came in and said, Sonia, I looked at that framework and I need this. I need more survey information. I need another pathway. As you were looking at this, you guys totally missed the boat on this one. This is our work together, and we know that we'll continue to grow it together with your support. So Shantae, if we can go to that last slide. As I said, I'm always someone thinking about these quotes, and these quotes just really keep me moving forward in the work. So I just want to close today, and we'll stay on for the last 10 minutes if anybody wants to unmute or to chat with questions. But we want to end with this thought for you, that we know that this can feel overwhelming at times. Where do I begin? And so what we want to close with is just, I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. So we hope as you close today, maybe you would put in the chat for us just one thing that you might take away from today. Is it that you'll go download the framework? Is it that you're going to have a conversation with your building principal or with one of the teachers that's across the hall from you? Is it that maybe you're going to think about a conversation that you're having with a family and slow down and make sure that you're not using jargon? What's the one thing that you might take away today that you can do in this work? So we want to thank you for joining us. And again, we'll stay on for the next 10 minutes or so here and just see if there's any questions or if anybody wants to unmute. But we hope that you'll put something in the chat to tell us what your next step is. Thank you, everybody. And my heart's exploding. I thought I could stay on mute, but I can't. I'm just loving all of these. Looking at the positive, just checking yourself and intentions and words. Looking at, the materials, how I love this, the materials like the syllabus, the schedules, the rubrics, just asking myself, is it easy to understand? Maybe even having someone else, just have a friend read it and see that's maybe not in the education world. Be having conversations with teachers and staff, looking for resources. These are all great next steps. Making sure that you're sharing positively. Making sure that you understand where OSD is and what we're trying to do to support your work. I hope you'll be honest with us too, and have conversations with us about what you need in the work. Families doing labs together, wonderful idea. That's great. And Sean, if you could pop the certificate back in there too, I know that sometimes those things get lost in the chat and that folks will want to download those. And I hope that you can all tell from this that I would love to visit with you by phone about it too. So just feel free to give me a call or email me with questions. Thanks so much, everybody.